The room was silent except for the faint hum of the air conditioner. James sat motionless at the dining table, a single glass of whiskey in front of him. His eyes were fixed on the glowing screen of his phone, the damning text messages seared into his memory. "I can't wait to see you again. Last night was incredible. I know, but we have to be careful." He's starting to suspect. The messages were between his wife, Rebecca, and a man named Vincent, a name that now burned into James' mind with an intensity he couldn't contain. The realization of her betrayal had arrived like a thunderclap, followed by a tidal wave of rage and disbelief. Rebecca, his wife of 15 years, the woman he had built a life with, was cheating on him. And not just cheating, it was calculated, secretive, and cold. A shocking discovery hours earlier, James had stumbled upon her deceit by accident. Rebecca had left her phone on the counter while taking a shower. A notification buzzed, and without much thought, James glanced at the screen. What he saw stopped him cold. A message from Vince with a red heart emoji. James's hands shook as he unlocked the phone. He'd known her passcode for years but had never felt the need to use it. Until now, the thread of messages unraveled a story that left him breathless. Secret meetings, intimate confessions, and casual jokes about his obliviousness filled the screen. Rebecca's words felt like knives slicing into him, each one deeper than the last. The confrontation that didn't happen when Rebecca emerged from the bathroom. Her hair wrapped in a towel, James was sitting in the living room, her phone gripped tightly in his hand. His heart thundered in his chest, his rage barely contained. "Hey," she said casually, flashing him the same smile she always did, as if nothing in their world had changed. He opened his mouth to confront her but stopped. Instead, he forced a smile and handed her the phone. "You left this buzzing on the counter," he said, his voice deceptively calm. Rebecca hesitated for a fraction of a second, so brief that someone less attuned to her might have missed it. "Thanks," she said lightly, taking the phone and walking away. James watched her retreating figure, a storm raging inside him. He wasn't ready to confront her. Not yet. He needed more than her lies to face her. He needed a plan. A painful memory that night, as Rebecca slept soundly beside him, James lay awake, staring at the ceiling. His mind raced with memories of their life together. Their first date, their wedding day, the birth of their daughter. Each cherished moment now felt tainted, poisoned by the knowledge of her betrayal. The sound of her soft breathing next to him only deepened the knife in his chest. How could she do this? Was she ever truly happy with him? Or had it all been an act? But as the hours dragged on, James's heartbreak hardened into something darker. Betrayal deserved retribution, didn't it? The unseen changes in the days that followed, James observed Rebecca more closely than ever before. He noticed the way she spent more time texting when she thought he wasn't looking, the hushed phone calls she took in their backyard, and the frequent excuses to go out in the evenings. She was meticulous, careful not to arouse suspicion. But James saw through it all now, and the weight of his knowledge grew heavier with each passing day. A dangerous plan. James began to formulate a plan, not just to confront Rebecca, but to make her pay for the pain she had caused him. The idea scared him at first, but as he replayed her betrayal in his mind, the fear faded, replaced by a cold determination. One evening, while Rebecca was out running errands, James found himself in the garage. His hands moved instinctively, retrieving a small metal box he hadn't touched in years. Inside was the revolver his father had given him long ago, a relic from his time in law enforcement. James stared at the weapon, the weight of it heavy in his hand. He wasn't sure what he intended to do with it yet, but the thought alone gave him a sense of control he hadn't felt in days. The breaking point came a week later. James had hired a private investigator to follow Rebecca, and the photos he received left no room for doubt. There she was, sitting at an outdoor cafe with Vincent. Their heads were close, their hands intertwined. Rebecca's face, which once radiated warmth and love for him, was now lit up with a happiness James hadn't seen in years. That night, as Rebecca walked through the front door, James was waiting for her. He didn't speak, didn't even move as she greeted him and headed upstairs. But as he watched her climb the steps, a single thought burned in his mind. She won't get away with this. The following morning, James's resolve had solidified. The sleepless night had only strengthened his belief that Rebecca's betrayal deserved more than confrontation. It required justice. He moved through the day with a cold clarity, his every action deliberate and methodical. As Rebecca sat at the breakfast table, casually scrolling through her phone, James studied her. She looked as composed as ever, her smile practiced and her voice light as she asked about his plans for the day. The sight of her acting so normal, so guilt-free, ignited his fury. "Just work," James replied, masking his true thoughts. "What about you?" Rebecca shrugged. "Nothing special. Maybe some errands later." James nodded, his face betraying nothing. But inside, he was certain her errands would involve Vincent. The first steps after Rebecca left the house, James opened her laptop. He had already installed monitoring software days earlier, something she would never suspect. It allowed him access to her emails, text messages, and browsing history. Scrolling through the data, he uncovered more than he expected. Hotel reservations, secret photos of Rebecca and Vincent, even emails discussing plans to move in together once the timing was right. His grip tightened on the mouse as he read Vincent's words. "She'll never see it coming. I'll take care of everything. Just stick to the plan." James's jaw clenched. What was the plan? And how far had they gone to ensure his ignorance? Setting the stage that evening, James sat alone in the garage, staring at the revolver. The weight of it felt heavier now, not just physically but emotionally. He had never considered himself capable of real violence. But then, he had never imagined Rebecca capable of such betrayal. He set the gun aside, taking a deep breath. This wouldn't be a crime of passion. It needed to be calculated, just like their affair. He would give them a taste of their own medicine. James began making preparations. First, he scheduled a meeting with his lawyer to discreetly alter his will, ensuring their daughter would be protected from the fallout. Then, he combed through Rebecca's phone records, identifying patterns in her movements. It didn't take long to discover where she would be meeting Vincent next. The secret rendezvous the following day, James left work early, citing a sudden headache to his boss. He parked his car 2 blocks away from the address he had uncovered, a boutique hotel just outside the city. From his vantage point, James watched as Rebecca arrived, her hair swept up and her dress far more elegant than she would ever wear for a casual outing. She checked her reflection in the rearview mirror before stepping out, her heels clicking confidently on the pavement. Moments later, Vincent appeared, his hand brushing Rebecca's back as they walked into the hotel together. James's stomach churned, but he forced himself to remain calm. The confrontation deferred as much as he wanted to storm into that hotel room and end it right there. James knew better. Acting out of anger would leave too many loose ends. He needed to wait to ensure that when the moment came, there would be no way out for either of them. Instead, he drove home, his mind racing. Rebecca slipped that evening. Rebecca returned home with the same nonchalance she had exhibited every day since James discovered her affair. She kissed him on the cheek and asked about his day, her tone so convincing it nearly made him question what he knew. But then, as she placed her phone on the kitchen counter, a notification lit up the screen. "Tonight was perfect. Can't wait for the weekend. V." James saw it before she could react, and their eyes locked. For the briefest moment, panic flashed across Rebecca's face, but she quickly recovered. "Work stuff," she said, forcing a laugh. "Vincent's one of the consultants helping with the new project." James didn't reply. He simply nodded, storing the interaction in the growing file of evidence against her. A chilling encounter 2 days later, James received an unexpected call from Vincent. The smooth, confident voice on the other end of the line sent chills down his spine. "James," Vincent began, his tone friendly but insincere. "I think we need to talk." James clenched the phone tighter. "What about?" "About Rebecca," Vincent replied. I think it's best for everyone if we clear the air. How about dinner? Just the two of us. James's mind raced. Was this an attempt to intimidate him? Or was Vincent arrogant enough to believe he could control the situation? Fine, James said evenly. Tell me when and where. A dark dinner. The meeting was set for a high-end restaurant downtown, the kind of place where men like Vincent felt at home. When James arrived, Vincent was already seated, a glass of red wine in hand. He greeted James with a broad smile, as if they were old friends. Thanks for coming, Vincent said, motioning for James to sit. I thought it was time we had an honest conversation. James sat, his expression cold. You've got a lot of nerve. Vincent leaned back, unbothered by the tension. Look, I know how this looks, but you have to understand, Rebecca and I didn't plan for this to happen. It's just chemistry. James felt his hands curl into fists under the table. Chemistry? He repeated, his voice low. You mean betrayal? Vincent sighed, as if James's anger was an inconvenience. You're upset. I get it. But I think we can all handle this like adults. The quiet resolve. James didn't respond. Instead, he let Vincent prattle on, weaving a narrative that painted him as a victim of circumstance rather than the calculating man he truly was. As the dinner wore on, James's rage boiled beneath the surface, but his outward demeanor remained calm. He smiled at Vincent, even thanked him for his honesty, all while mentally solidifying his plan. By the time the check arrived, Vincent seemed satisfied that he had defused the situation. But as James left the restaurant, his thoughts were consumed by one certainty. Vincent had no idea what was coming. The encounter with Vincent left James seething but resolute. The man's smug demeanor, his condescending tone, and his dismissive attitude toward the betrayal had pushed James beyond the point of no return. If Vincent thought he had outmaneuvered James, he was about to face a devastating reality. That night, as James sat alone in the quiet of their home, he began laying the groundwork for his revenge. Every move would be calculated, every detail meticulously planned. This wasn't just about justice. It was about making Rebecca and Vincent understand the depth of their betrayal in a way they would never forget. The seed of doubt. James started with Rebecca. In subtle, almost imperceptible ways, he began to chip away at her confidence. One morning, as she rushed to get ready for work, James casually mentioned, I ran into Sarah yesterday. She asked if everything was okay with us. Said you seemed distracted lately. Rebecca froze for a fraction of a second before forcing a smile. Sarah's always reading too much into things, she said lightly. James nodded, pretending to accept her answer. But as the days went on, he continued to plant small seeds of doubt. Comments about mutual friends noticing changes in her behavior, questions about her increasingly erratic schedule. Rebecca began to grow uneasy, her once flawless composure starting to crack. Setting the trap. Meanwhile, James focused on Vincent. He knew that a man as arrogant as Vincent would have skeletons in his closet, and James was determined to find them. Hiring the private investigator again, James dug deeper into Vincent's life. What he uncovered was more than he had hoped for. Vincent had a history of manipulating women, many of whom were married. He was involved in several shady business deals, some of which bordered on outright fraud. And most damningly, he was deeply in debt. A fact Vincent had carefully hidden behind his polished exterior. Armed with this information, James prepared his next move. The confrontation with Rebecca. The moment came on a quiet Sunday afternoon. Rebecca was in the kitchen, scrolling through her phone, when James walked in holding a manila folder. We need to talk, he said, his voice calm but firm. Rebecca looked up, her expression wary. About what? James placed the folder on the counter and slid it toward her. About Vincent. Her face went pale as she opened the folder, revealing photos of her and Vincent together, screenshots of their messages, and a list of Vincent's financial misdeeds. I know everything, James said. The affair, the lies, the plans to leave me for him. Rebecca's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. Finally, she stammered, James, I can explain. Don't, he interrupted. I'm not interested in your excuses. Rebecca's desperation tears welled up in Rebecca's eyes as she tried to defend herself. It wasn't supposed to happen like this, she said. I never wanted to hurt you. Save it, James said coldly. You didn't just hurt me. You destroyed everything we built together. And for what? A man who can't even keep his own life together. Rebecca flinched at his words, her facade crumbling. I made a mistake, she admitted. But we can fix this. Please, James, don't throw everything away. James laughed bitterly. You already did that, Rebecca. I'm just making sure you face the consequences. Drawing Vincent in the next phase of James's plan involved luring Vincent into a trap. Using the information he had gathered, James crafted a series of emails posing as an investor interested in one of Vincent's fraudulent business ventures. The bait worked. Vincent, desperate for money, eagerly agreed to meet at a remote location to discuss the investment. The final setup on the night of the meeting, James arrived early, ensuring the secluded location. A dimly lit warehouse on the outskirts of town was prepared for what was to come. He brought with him the revolver, a tape recorder, and a file containing all the evidence he had collected on Vincent's illegal activities. When Vincent arrived, his confident swagger faltered as he saw James waiting for him. What's this? Vincent asked, his tone cautious. This, James said, holding up the file, is everything you've been hiding. Fraud, debts, manipulation. It's all here. Vincent's expression darkened. You don't know what you're getting into, he said. James ignored the threat. You've destroyed enough lives, Vincent. It's time you face the consequences. The turning point as James laid out his evidence. Vincent's demeanor shifted from defensive to panicked. What do you want? He asked, his voice unsteady. James leaned forward, his eyes cold. I want you to end things with Rebecca. Completely. And then I want you to disappear. Vincent laughed nervously. You think you can scare me into walking away? James reached into his jacket and pulled out the revolver, placing it on the table between them. I don't think, Vincent. I know. The warning Vincent's bravado crumbled as James detailed the consequences of ignoring his warning. Walk away now, James said, or I'll make sure everyone knows exactly who you are and what you've done. Vincent hesitated, weighing his options. Finally, he nodded. Fine, I'll leave. But this isn't over. Yes, it is, James replied. Rebecca's world collapses the next morning. Vincent sent Rebecca a curt message ending their relationship. She was devastated, her carefully constructed fantasy shattered. When she confronted James, begging for forgiveness, he simply shook his head. You made your choice, Rebecca. Now you'll have to live with it. The final twist, but James wasn't finished. He anonymously leaked the evidence of Vincent's fraudulent dealings to the authorities, ensuring his downfall. As for Rebecca, James filed for divorce, leaving her to face the wreckage of her decisions alone. And while James knew his actions had crossed a line, he felt no remorse. Betrayal demanded justice, and he had delivered it. The fallout from James's actions began to ripple outward, disrupting lives in ways even he hadn't anticipated. Vincent's sudden disappearance from Rebecca's life left her unmoored, her once confident demeanor replaced with visible anxiety and desperation. She tried to maintain her composure, but James could see the cracks forming. I know you had something to do with this, Rebecca said one evening, her voice trembling. James didn't deny it. He wasn't who you thought he was, he replied coldly. Maybe you should thank me. Her eyes filled with tears, but she didn't press further. There was an air of inevitability about her now, as if she understood that her actions had set these events in motion and that there was no turning back. Vincent's downfall, the evidence James leaked to the authorities, didn't just destroy Vincent's career. It exposed a web of corruption that implicated several high-profile figures. The media latched onto the story, broadcasting Vincent's name alongside words like fraud, embezzlement, and deception. James watched the news coverage with a sense of grim satisfaction. Vincent was arrested within days, his smug confidence replaced with the blank stare of a man who had lost everything. Poetic justice, James muttered to himself as he switched off the TV. Rebecca's isolation. Rebecca, meanwhile, found herself increasingly isolated. Her friends, many of whom were mutual acquaintances with James, began to distance themselves. Whispers of her affair and the scandal surrounding Vincent spread through their social circles, leaving her humiliated and alone. One night, as she sat at the kitchen table, staring at a half-empty glass of wine, she turned to James with a look of resignation. "Is this what you wanted?" she asked quietly. "To ruin me?" James didn't answer right away. "What I wanted," he said finally, "was to make you understand what your betrayal cost me." Rebecca nodded, tears streaming down her face. "And now, James said, his tone unyielding, "I move on, with or without you." A complicated freedom. James filed for divorce the following week, a decision that sent shockwaves through Rebecca's already crumbling world. She begged him to reconsider, promising to change, to rebuild what they had lost. But James was resolute. "We're beyond repair," he said. "You made your choice and I've made mine." Rebecca's pleas grew more desperate as the divorce proceedings advanced. "We've been together for 15 years, James," she said one night, her voice breaking. "Doesn't that mean anything to you?" "It meant everything to me," he replied, "until you threw it away." An unexpected encounter. As James navigated his new reality, he found himself at a coffee shop one afternoon, flipping through emails on his laptop. A voice interrupted his thoughts. "James Carter, right?" He looked up to see a woman around his age, her sharp features softened by a kind smile. "Do I know you?" he asked. "Not exactly," she said, pulling out the chair across from him and sitting down. "I'm Elise Lang, Marcus Vincent Lang's sister." James froze, his mind racing. He hadn't expected to hear Vincent's name again, much less from someone so close to him. A shocking revelation. Elise leaned forward, her expression serious. "I know what you did to my brother," she said. James bristled. "If you're here to defend him—" "I'm not," Elise interrupted. "Vincent was complicated. I loved him, but he had his demons. And from what I've pieced together, he got exactly what was coming to him." "Then why are you here?" James asked, his suspicion evident. Elise hesitated before answering. "Because there's something you need to know about Rebecca. Something Vincent told me before everything fell apart." James's stomach tightened. "What are you talking about?" "Rebecca didn't just cheat on you, James," Elise said, her voice low. "She was helping Vincent siphon money from your accounts. They planned to drain you dry and leave you with nothing." The truth comes out. James stared at her, stunned. "That's impossible. I would have noticed." "Not if they were careful," Elise said. "Vincent was good at covering his tracks. But when he realized you were onto them," Rebecca panicked. "She wanted out of the scheme, but Vincent wouldn't let her. That's why he pushed so hard to meet with you. He was trying to figure out how much you knew." James's mind raced as Elise's words sank in. Had Rebecca betrayed him even more deeply than he thought? Confrontation with Rebecca that evening, James confronted Rebecca with Elise's revelation. She denied it at first, her protests growing more frantic as James pressed her. "You're lying," she shouted, her face red with anger. "Am I?" James countered, throwing a stack of financial documents onto the table. "Because these numbers don't lie. This is money I never authorized to be transferred, and all of it leads back to Vincent's shell accounts." Rebecca's shoulders slumped, the fight draining out of her. "I didn't want to do it," she said finally, her voice trembling. "But Vincent, he threatened me. He said if I didn't help him, he'd ruin both of us." James shook his head, disgusted. "You could have come to me, Rebecca. We could have faced him together. But instead, you chose to betray me." The breaking point, the weight of her actions finally broke Rebecca. She collapsed into a chair, sobbing uncontrollably. "I'm so sorry, James," she said through her tears. "I was weak and I made terrible choices. Please, I'll do anything to make this right." But James had nothing left to give. "There's no coming back from this, Rebecca," he said coldly. "You didn't just betray me. You destroyed everything we built together." A new direction. James moved forward with the divorce, finalizing it within weeks. Rebecca left their home, her once bright future now shadowed by regret and the consequences of her actions. As for James, he began to rebuild his life, focusing on himself for the first time in years. The betrayal had scarred him deeply, but it had also taught him the value of resilience and the importance of self-respect. With Rebecca gone and Vincent behind bars, James began the arduous task of piecing his life back together. Days turned into weeks, and though the scars of betrayal remained, he found solace in his newfound independence. Yet, there were moments of unease, as if a shadow still lingered, something unresolved. One evening, as he sorted through the last of Rebecca's belongings, James discovered a hidden compartment in her jewelry box. Inside was a small USB drive, its plain exterior giving no hint of its contents. The final puzzle curiosity got the better of him. Plugging the drive into his laptop, James found a folder labeled, "For Rebecca Only." Within it were dozens of encrypted files, but one stood out, a video file with the title "Final Confession." His breath hitched as he opened it. The screen flickered to life, revealing Rebecca sitting at her vanity, her face pale and drawn. "If you're watching this," she began, her voice trembling, "it means everything has fallen apart, and there are things you need to know. Things I couldn't bring myself to tell you." James leaned closer, his heart pounding. Rebecca's confession, "I never wanted any of this," Rebecca said, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "When Vincent approached me, I was vulnerable. You were so busy with work, so distant. He made me feel seen, wanted." She took a deep breath, her hands trembling as she continued. "But it wasn't just an affair. Vincent had a plan, a way to exploit your company, your finances. He convinced me to help him, said it would secure a future for us. I was stupid, James. I thought I could control it, that it wouldn't go too far. But Vincent was dangerous, and once I was in, there was no way out." A shocking admission. Rebecca's voice faltered as she looked directly into the camera. "And then, I found out what he was planning. He didn't just want to ruin you financially. He wanted to ruin you completely. He had someone watching you, gathering information. He said he needed leverage, but I think he wanted to hurt you. Maybe even worse than that." James's blood ran cold. The idea that Vincent had been watching him, plotting not just financial ruin but something more sinister, sent a chill down his spine. "I tried to stop him," Rebecca continued. "That's why I started pulling away. I thought if I distanced myself from him, he'd leave us alone. But it only made him angrier." The missing piece. Rebecca wiped her eyes, her expression desperate. "James, if anything happens to me, if something feels off, you need to know. There's more to this than you realize. Vincent had allies, people who owed him favors. People who wouldn't think twice about getting revenge if they think you're responsible for his downfall." She reached forward, as if to turn off the camera, but hesitated. "I'm so sorry for everything. For betraying you. For dragging us into this mess. I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I hope one day you'll understand." The video ended abruptly, leaving James staring at the screen, his mind racing. Unfinished business. James felt the weight of Rebecca's words settle over him. She had been complicit, yes, but she had also tried to stop Vincent. And now, the revelation of others involved in Vincent's schemes added a new layer of danger. The next day, James contacted Elise Lang, Vincent's sister. She listened in stunned silence as James recounted the confession. "That sounds like Vincent," Elise said finally. "He always had a way of pulling people into his web. And if Rebecca's right, his allies won't stop just because he's gone." "What do I do?" James asked, his voice tight with anxiety. "You fight," Elise said. "You make sure they know you're not an easy target." The first threat that evening, James received an anonymous text. "You've made powerful enemies. Watch your back." The message confirmed his fears. Whoever had been working with Vincent wasn't finished yet. But James was no longer the man who had blindly trusted his wife or sat passively while his life unraveled. He began fortifying his home, installing security cameras and reinforcing the locks. He reached out to a lawyer and private investigator, determined to uncover the identities of Vincent's associates before they could strike. Rebecca's letter. A week later, James received a package in the mail with no return address. Inside was a handwritten letter from Rebecca, postmarked just days before her departure. James, if you're reading this, I'm gone. I've been trying to make things right, but I know it's not enough. I've left you something, a key to a safe deposit box. Inside, you'll find the last pieces of the puzzle. I hope it helps you finish what I couldn't. Rebecca. The safe deposit box. The next morning, James visited the bank and retrieved the box. Inside were more documents linking Vincent to his associates, along with a handwritten list of names. At the top of the list was a name James recognized, a prominent local businessman who had attended their anniversary party. James's stomach churned. How deep did this conspiracy go? A call to action. As James studied the documents, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. Rebecca's betrayal had nearly destroyed him, but her final acts had given him the tools to fight back. Armed with the evidence, James reached out to Elise again. Together, they began formulating a plan to expose the remaining players in Vincent's network. This isn't just about revenge anymore, James said. It's about making sure they can't hurt anyone else. Elise nodded, her expression resolute. Let's finish this. James stood at the precipice of a storm he could no longer avoid. The evidence Rebecca left him, combined with the information Elise had shared, painted a chilling picture of a sprawling network of deceit. Vincent's allies weren't just criminals, they were powerful, influential figures, and they were watching James closely. A dangerous meeting. Armed with his findings, James arranged a meeting with one of the names on Rebecca's list, Robert Nash, the businessman who had attended their anniversary party. Nash was known for his affable demeanor and generous donations to local charities, but the documents revealed a darker side. He was a key player in Vincent's financial schemes. The meeting took place at a high-end steakhouse. Nash greeted James with a warm smile, his handshake firm and confident. James, good to see you, Nash said, his tone casual. What can I do for you? James wasted no time. You can start by explaining your connection to Vincent Lang. The smile faded from Nash's face, replaced by a cold, calculating expression. I don't know what you're talking about, he said, leaning back in his chair. James pulled out a folder, dropping it on the table. These documents say otherwise. Nash glanced at the folder but didn't touch it. Careful, James, he said, his voice low. You're playing a dangerous game. The warning escalates. Later that night, James returned home to find a brick thrown through his front window. Taped to it was a note. This is your only warning. Walk away. James felt a surge of anger and determination. The people behind this wanted him to be afraid, but he refused to back down. A calculated strike. With Elise's help, James devised a plan to expose Nash and the other conspirators. They leaked carefully curated pieces of evidence to a trusted journalist, ensuring the story would gain traction before Nash and his allies could suppress it. The fallout was immediate. Headlines screamed about a financial conspiracy reaching the highest levels of local business. Nash's name was plastered across every news outlet, and whispers of criminal investigations began to circulate. But James knew this was just the beginning. The climactic confrontation. Days later, James received a call from an unknown number. Meet me at the docks tonight, the voice said. We need to talk. James hesitated, knowing it could be a trap. But he also knew he couldn't ignore it. That night, he arrived at the docks, the cold air biting at his skin. Nash was waiting for him, flanked by two men who radiated menace. You've made quite the mess, James, Nash said, his tone dangerously calm. You made the mess, James shot back. I'm just cleaning it up. Nash took a step closer, his expression hard. You don't understand what you're up against. This isn't just about money. It's about control. And you're in way over your head. James held his ground. Maybe, But I'm not the one who's running scared. Nash's eyes narrowed. You think you've won? You've only scratched the surface. Walk away now and maybe we'll let you. James smiled grimly. I don't think so. At that moment, the sound of sirens filled the air. Elise had tipped off the authorities, and they arrived in force, lights flashing and guns drawn. Nash's men scattered, but Nash himself was arrested on the spot. An unexpected twist as Nash was led away in handcuffs. He turned to James and said something that sent a chill down his spine. You're not safe. Not from them. James tried to push the words from his mind, but they lingered, a haunting reminder that the battle might not be over. Closure and reflection in the weeks that followed. The remaining members of Vincent's network were exposed, their schemes dismantled piece by piece. The authorities praised James for his courage, but he remained wary, knowing the shadows could hold more threats. One evening, Elise visited him, bringing a bottle of wine. You did it, she said, pouring them each a glass. James shook his head. We did it. And I couldn't have done it without you. They toasted to their hard-won victory, but James's mind drifted to Rebecca. Despite everything, her final acts had given him the strength and information he needed to fight back. A new beginning months later, James stood in the living room of his rebuilt home. The scars of betrayal remained, but they no longer defined him. He had found peace, not just in justice, but in the knowledge that he had faced the worst and survived. As he looked out the window, the sun setting over the horizon, James felt something he hadn't in a long time. Hope. The listener's question the story ends with a question for the audience. When faced with betrayal and danger, how far would you go to protect yourself and seek justice? And at what cost?